Building your first workshop can feel overwhelming, and it's easy to waste a lot of money on tools that you don't actually need. This video is going to give you a clear, no-fluff list on the foundational tools that will help you build just about anything without breaking the bank. My name is Brogan Pratt, and with over 10 years as a robotics and design educator, I've set up multiple workshops from scratch. I know exactly which tools provide the most bang for your buck. I'm going to run you through the core hand tools that every maker needs, your first power tools you should buy, and a few key items that might make your life much easier. So here at the workbench, one of the first tools I'm always reaching for is a hand drill. DeWalt, Makita, Ryobi, really anything works here. I prefer a cordless version as opposed to a corded. Corded are pretty old school and probably give you too much torque for what is you're actually needing nowadays. Typically, you can buy these things in like a two-part set. So they usually come with sort of an impact driver and a hand drill, but an impact driver is completely unnecessary, I think, for the most part, especially on smaller projects inside your workshop. And you can do both jobs with a drill. You want to make sure you've got one with an adjustable chuck on here so that you can use quite large bits up to about 1/2 inch and quite small bits down to about a 1/16. That's really going to help you out with a whole bunch of different projects. After the hand drill, I'm usually reaching for some different measuring tools. A good tape measure will save your life. Depending on where you are in the world, you can use a metric tape measure like myself if you're over in Europe and some parts of Canada, or you can grab yourself a imperial tape measure. Just make sure you don't cheap out on these things. I have seen far too many times where the difference between your tape measure and my tape measure is different because they have different measuring points. So as long as you're at least using the same tape measure, you won't have a problem with having your millimeter is different from my millimeter. I also recommend you don't cheap out on one of these things. Getting a slightly nicer tape measure is just going to make your life a little bit better. And to be honest, a $1 or €1 tape measure is not that much cheaper than a $3 or $5 or euro tape measure that's actually going to do the job you're looking for. After a tape measure, I highly recommend you get yourself a set of digital calipers. And digital calipers just have a little screen here. It allows you to measure the size of different things. So for instance, if I wanted to measure the size of my finger here, I can use this side here to figure out how many millimeters or inches that is. And then you can also measure internal diameter, something like a ring. You can go ahead, pull around, and you can measure that internal diameter of that ring too. So I use tape measures for measuring really large things, and a set of calipers, good digital set of calipers for measuring small things. Next tool I'm generally reaching for is one of these guys. This is a multi-tool. Some brands, Leatherman, Swiss Army knife, things like that have them. But the nice thing about multi-tools here is you can get multiple tools inside one. So this is a set of spring-loaded pliers. It also has a wire cutter and a wire stripper on the inside of it for working with that. It has a set of needle nose I really like. And then it usually has more tools inside. So for instance, I've got a larger slot screwdriver here. I have a precision screwdriver for like watch glasses. I have a set of scissors on here that I have access to. It gives me access to a swappable bit here, so I can have number 1 Phillips or a 1/4 inch slot here. They both lock in place. And then I've got a can opener if I would ever need to use one. Would I ever need to use in the shop? Probably not, but sometimes for puncturing holes, it's not a bad idea. It's usually also got a few small tools in here. I have a blade on this one. I've got both a thin file and a metal file. I have a saw access to, and then I have a second blade on this. I really like this Wave Plus from Leatherman. It is a little bit more expensive, but it saves you having to buy from some extra tools, and I keep this on my person probably about every hour when I'm inside the shop because it's just so handy to be able to pull out a set of pliers exactly when you need them. Now, the Leatherman Wave does not come spring-loaded, so what I've done is I've taken a little bit of super glue, and I've added some neodymium magnets here so that it allows it to bounce off, so it automatically opens itself back up. Next tool is a good set of screwdrivers. I recommend getting yourself some Phillips screwdrivers, some slot screwdrivers, and then depending where you are in the world, some Robertson screwdrivers. And if you're in Europe, Torx is probably not a bad idea either. It's far more common. Recommend you don't cheap out on these again. Getting yourself the absolute most bargain bin is going to be made from soft steel. And when you go to actually try to strip and screw or try to turn in screws, what's going to happen is you're actually going to end up bending the tips of your screwdrivers. You don't want to do that. So having a slightly more expensive set is generally enough to get yourself some hardened steel. If you're planning on working with smaller electronics, a precision set of screwdrivers can really help you out here. It's typically a smaller screwdriver end with a rotating point, and then you have access to a whole bunch of different bits, typically in smaller sizes. I like the iFixit kit. I think that one works really well and does just about most needs for small electronics projects, because typically working on a screwdriver like this with a 0-tip Phillips or a 00 Phillips is an absolute pain. Next, there's a few electronic tools that I'd recommend you get. You should get yourself a good soldering iron and a decent multimeter. Make sure your multimeter is capable of measuring both voltage in both direct current and AC current or alternating current. You should also be able to measure amperage, continuity, and resistance on these as well. Do yourself a favor, get yourself one that is auto-ranging. When I say auto-ranging, especially if you're new, it basically means that when you flick it onto amperage, you can know whether you're working with milliamps or full amps, but auto-ranging means you just go ahead and measure amps themselves. This one is not auto-ranging, and if you're not aware, there's things like amperage, which is big stuff out of your house. There's milliamps, which is smaller stuff, and then there's microamps, which is even smaller amounts of electrical current. And if you're not sure what I just talked about, get yourself one that is auto-ranging. You can just go ahead and flip it to amperage, and then you don't have to worry about blowing any fuses, because these things come with fuses inside of them, and I have definitely done that before. I've been in the wrong amperage mode, and I am measuring a system that is far larger than what happens when I'm blowing a fuse, and you have to replace those, which is kind of a pain in the butt. A decent soldering iron is also really helpful. I really like this little guy. It's called the Pine Sill. It's probably one of the cheaper and better ones on the market, because all you have to do is plug it into a USB-C power supply, and you're off to the races. I use a 100-watt power supply that I just use for charging my laptop, so I already had one of these. So being able to have access to this is quite nice. It's very compact and it heats up wicked quick. And for enough small projects, this is basically everything that you need. One of the last tools you need is some WD-40 and some duct tape. If it is moving and it shouldn't, use duct tape. If it's not moving and it should, use some WD-40. I believe that was Hank from King of the Hill that said that. But these are two very versatile sets. You can see I've had this set of WD-40 for a very, very long time. It's quite rusted out. This thing is probably from the 80s. So we're looking at probably 40 years old. Older than when I was born. So you don't use a whack load of it, but it is something that comes in handy a lot, as with duct tape. There's nothing wrong with having a few extra quick adhesives or non-adhesives, lubricants around your system. Now, technically, WD-40 is not a lubricant, but for most projects, this is more than good enough. And the last thing you're going to need in your shop is a little bit of safety equipment. Get yourself some gloves for when you're working on things that are rough. Get yourself some hearing protection for when you're working with either loud power tools, and some eye protection if things might flap up. You're working with a hammer, you're trying to pry things off. It's not worth it to have something hit you in the eye and you end up going blind because of that. Or same thing, if you're working in a loud environment all day, you start getting some more power tools beyond a drill. Getting yourself some hearing protection is going to save you off in the long run. So I hope you found that helpful in getting your shop up and equipped. I would say that with these 6 tools, I do about 95% of the jobs that I generally need to do using one of those 6. You can get a lot done with these tools. Now, obviously, if you want to get a little bit further, we can start talking more about different power tools and things like that. But for a basic shop setup, that's more than enough to be able to get yourself up and running.